I walked down the hallway just the other day and a kid's paper on the wall says, I want to be a teacher. Some of those kids never saw an Indigenous person being a teacher. And so now it's opening up this whole realm of possibilities for these kids to have their families and their relations actually doing the teaching.
You're listening to the Bold by Choice podcast with Vashaunta Harris and Jim Goenner, where we ask what school could be and learn from the people brave enough to build it. Powered by the National Charter Schools Institute.
Now, we've been having such a ball this season, and we've been joined by our friend and colleague, Don Cooper. Don, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, today is a very interesting topic to me because we're talking about a reading that comes from the book, A New Deal for Teachers. And as a previous teacher, this really brought up a lot of memories and a lot of ideas for me. So I want to start with this question. When we think about this chapter, what does it suggest needs to fundamentally change about the relationship between teachers with authority and accountability in order for schools to truly be different?
Sure, great question. And I just kind of want to start out the author of the book, Curtis Johnson, and I have something in common. I think Curtis Johnson and all three of us have something in common, and that is we are real big fans of Ted Coldry's work. And when Ted would write about chartering and system change, he'd often write about how do you put teachers in control? How do you put them in the driver's seat so they can try new things? And Curtis Johnson's work on A New Deal for Teachers really is that of how do you reinvigorate the professionalism that comes with teaching. I think one of the interesting things about teaching is teachers are professionals, but they work for the administrators. They work for the principals and the superintendents. Those are the folks who are calling the shots, and those are the folks who are farthest away from the classroom. So how do you expect to get good decisions for kids when the people who are making the highest stakes decisions aren't even in the classroom all the time? So what I love about Curtis's work is it changes the notion of teacher professionalism to be more like what we see in the professionalism in other areas. So think about accounting, think about lawyers, think about doctors, think about other professionals. The professionals are in charge and the administrators work for them. Teaching is the only situation where it's reversed. So in A New Deal for Teachers, Curtis is really talking about how do we elevate the status of teachers within their buildings, within society, so they're the ones who are making key decisions on resource allocation, on how schools are operated, on governance decisions. So that way you're going to get the people who are closest to the kids making decisions that affect resource allocation and how we're going to teach kids. And also, it's going to reinvigorate the teaching profession too, because who really wants to go to work every day in a model like what we have right now, when you can have a greater professional ownership, when you can develop as a professional in different ways and have that pride and satisfaction of a job well done?
Absolutely. And Jim, we've been talking about systems through this process, right? And so when we think about a system that would do just as Don explained, put that autonomy in the teacher's hand, put that collective responsibility among the team of teachers. How would that really challenge what we consider as like the traditional employer-employee model that kind of dominates the system we have today?
It'd change everything. And I think if Curtis was here speaking himself, he'd say there's a big difference between giving teachers voice and giving them responsibility. And he's a huge advocate of giving teachers responsibility. And he'd say something like, you don't have to motivate people who own the work. Ownership culture produces commitment. And that when teachers have responsibility, they have ownership, they are committed. When they're committed, they stay. When they're committed, they give their best. When they're committed, they build relationships with students. And we all know the power of teachers and students and relationships and what's possible.
And Don, if we took this idea of putting the autonomy and the responsibility in the teacher's hands, what would you predict, or what would Johnson suggest would be the outcome or the impact with students?
Oh my goodness, I think you're going to get tremendous results for kids if we do this. And part of why is because it reinvigorates teachers as individuals and professionals. And once you get excited to come to work, once you see what you do and your ideas have an impact, once you have a level of control and decision-making authority to do things that you think are best and try stuff and innovate and learn, then you're really going to unlock the magic that I think is necessary for kids to achieve more. I mean, who is inspired by the teacher who just reads the lesson plan that's prepackaged, goes through the PowerPoint, is working off of the quote unquote standards on things, going through the motions, right? That teacher is doing everything that the system might think is best, is doing the quote unquote best practices, but there's no passion, there's no spark. It's that spark where learning occurs and where you start motivating kids. So the more power we give back to teachers and the more we elevate the profession, the more likely it is we're going to reach more kids and inspire them to learn too.
Yeah. So, Jim, what would systems need to do if we were to embrace this New Deal seriously and at scale?
You know, I'm going to say it in a bit of a quip, but we trust teachers with students every day, but we actually don't trust them with the school.
Mm.
And we know when people are trusted, when they are given responsibility, when there's high expectations, better things happen. It's not a permission and control, it's a trust and enable and support. And that's the power of this idea. You know, Ted Coldry gave us the theory. Curtis Johnson shows us the practice. Vashaunta, the question isn't whether teachers are capable of leading schools. The question is whether the system is willing to let them. We know the answer for the one best system. No. But chartering provides a different opportunity. And we're seeing schools that are trusting them, are letting them take responsibility, are letting them to make change at the closest to the action. And that's where we're seeing magical things happen.
Well, we're going to hear a little bit about how this works in practice with our next guest. Well, Jim, Don, and I just explored the idea that our education system was quite largely designed during the industrial era. So that was when young people were expected to spend most of their adolescence preparing for adulthood rather than participating in it. But many educators today are asking a very different question. What happens when we trust young people with real responsibility earlier? When students contribute to their communities, defend their ideas publicly, and take ownership of their learning. Today, we're joined by Dan Porter, a leader at Kwiyagat Community Academy, a school that's rethinking what adolescence can look like for young people. And he has one of his students, Naomi, with us today. Dan, welcome to Bold by Choice.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, before we dive in, we'd love to open up and give you a chance to start with your story and introduce yourself. So I'll give you a chance to do just that.
I am an educator of 30 years. Actually, this is my 35th year in education. Been at a local school district for much of that time and went from a paraprofessional for special needs student and finished my career as an assistant superintendent with a lot of jobs in between. So that's kind of my track.
And you have a young lady with you today, Naomi. Naomi, we'd love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Mike DeGovan, Nunania, Naomi Cowboy.
So what she said is Mike Teguven, and that's hello, friend. Nunania is my name is, and then her name. So that's a introduction in Ute.
Well, that was very beautiful, Naomi. And you're a very brave student for not only being on the mic for this podcast, but also introducing yourself using your native voice. So we very much appreciate you and recognize how hard that can be with a room full of adults. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So the origins of the school are deeply tied to local Indigenous community. You mentioned that before the school existed, you were working closely with tribal leaders and seeing a pattern with students being pushed out of traditional schools. Can you tell us how the Community Academy came together and what problem the founders were trying to solve?
Sure. Like you mentioned, after 19 years as a hearing officer in the former district that I was at, I got to work a lot with the K-12 director down here. Her name's Tina King Washington. She's a Ute tribal member, and we kept seeing troubles with these students happening, and she was bound and determined, we've got to change this. She went to the tribal lawyer and said, hey, there's things going on up here we can't seem to get fixed. What's the opportunity to start a school down here in Toyac? And that tribal lawyer named Peter Ortego said, I can help you get that going. So Tina King Washington, Peter Ortego, Selwyn White Skunk, he is now our tribal chairman. They put together a guiding committee. Almost instantly, the whole council was behind it. They spent 2.5 years getting charters through CSI in Colorado, rather than our local district RE1, and got a charter for license and started the school. So 2.5 years of work. The conversations with the tribe, lots of elders, lots of people with previous experience, and not really stellar experiences with RE1. So they had a lot of support to do that. What they wanted was something where typically they felt like the issue, a lot of youth students were just kind of invisible. They were either kids that really needed a lot of help and didn't get that help, and so came out of schools with nothing or having to move to boarding schools, or there were kids that really were talented that were never identified for gifted and talented and never had those things growing and opportunities to grow. And so the whole vision for them was to a school built around revitalizing the Ute language and culture. A lot of that has been disappearing because there's a generation that the boarding school generation and the generation after that it was never encouraged to keep those things. Those things were really trying to be forced out. And so the whole idea is to get that coming back. And so we've got elders that have a lot of that knowledge, and now our kids are getting a lot of that knowledge, and they're actually going home and teaching parents a lot of this stuff that parents weren't aware of.
So the parents are the sandwich generation.
They really are. Yes.
I got to imagine that brings a smile to the hearts of the elders to see this taking off and flourishing.
It really does, and it really does. I think you hit it on the head, Jim. The smiles that you see just when they hear kids sing a song in Ute, or Naomi was talking to me earlier about hand games, being able to play some of the old traditional games and things, and so it really is. I think making them realize the importance that they're important in this community.
One of the things we talk about with schools is that education isn't a transaction, it's a relationship. And why the culture, the environment, the team, what we ultimately get around to is the love, makes it a place where either you get to go or you gotta go.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to you and to Naomi, is the school live up to its name? Is it a place you get to go, or is it a place you gotta go?
Do you get to go here, or do you gotta go here? Or does it depend on the day?
It depends on the day.
Jim, what's so interesting about this school, and one of the things I'm just so thrilled with, is when I was up at RE1, I think at the time we probably had 5 Indigenous employees throughout all different departments, cooks and janitors and a teacher, maybe I think 2 teachers. So the opportunity for these kids to see somebody that looked like them in a teaching role all day long was very rare. And when you're talking about people being happy, the community, that feeling of a home, that's where I really see a difference. It's just the opportunity to be around people that look like them doing these jobs. I walked down the hallway just the other day, and a kid's paper on the wall says, I want to be a teacher. Some of those kids never saw an Indigenous person being a teacher. And so now it's opening up this whole realm of possibilities for these kids to have their families and their relations actually doing the teaching.
I love that. We advocate a lot for people to see themselves as stewards of possibility and creating and showing that things are possible that, before they just couldn't be for whatever reason. And so to have that becoming an embodiment of the school and the students and the adults is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is a special
Yeah.
place to come to.
Dan, one of the topics we explored when we spoke a few weeks ago is there's this difference, right, between schools that treat young people that come into their building like kind of sheep that they've got to herd, right? There's so much compliance and following the rules versus schools that treat this as a time for students to be able to make real contributions. Can you walk us through what that journey looks like for students at your school?
Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is we really want Nuchu youth to have an educational model that is grounded in their culture so that they can be the leaders and help lead their communities. It doesn't mean they have to stay here, but if they can come back and help be the guide to help make this community stronger, healthier, um, one of the things we would see sometimes is these students weren't grounded enough in their culture, that they didn't have any armor when things happened to them in the other schools. They didn't have a lot of things that we have, or I feel very blessed to have been able to fall back on. And that was a tremendous knowledge of my past and probably the probability of my future and those kind of things. And a lot of times our youth kids didn't know what their past was because it had been stripped from them. So our goal is to not only teach them culture and let them be teachers, like I said, go home and teach parents, but also studying what's going to make us a stronger community. How can we be better relatives? And that's a big deal here. I didn't realize just how big. I have some elders working here, and the other day, one of the kids came up to a grandma and said, "Could you be my grandma?" And she said, "Yeah, I can be your grandma." And they really do have. I love that about the Ute culture. They really do have. Everybody has a part in it, and uh, uh, I had a student that was having a big had a problem on the playground. And instead of a Mudagach, which is a white man, going out there and me trying to say, "Hey, get off the playground, you need to come in and you need to listen," I was able to turn to a lady and she went out and she said, "Grandson, why are you acting like this? What's got you upset?" And all these things. And he immediately was able to calm down. It was part of his culture. It was somebody he recognized. And it was able to share with her and the patience and stuff. And so what I'm liking about this with these students is it's teaching them, it's giving them armor, it's teaching them how to, have some agency, stand up for themselves. So many times when I was in hearings with these kids, it came to Tina King Washington, a K-12 representative from the Ute Reservation, or myself, to be making sure that they were having a voice. And what I'm starting to see with these kids is we're giving them the opportunity to have their own voice. They're not having to depend on other people. So it's a great opportunity to be leaders. And Naomi is one of those leaders. I can tell you that about her. She is a kind girl, and I've seen her broker peace agreements between friends that are fighting because she gets along with people, and she's a real leader in that social emotional realm where she's able to help people calm down and speak to each other. And it's one of the reasons that when we were looking for a student, I was excited to find that she'd be interested in doing this.
That's a perfect segue. I was going to ask Naomi, as a student there, how do you experience the opportunity to contribute to your school and to your community?
You are a classroom leader. Would you agree to that?
Yes.
How do you show that?
You have to be strong, being kind, and help others.
Well, that's right. One of the things we talk about all the time, Jim will tell you, is making sure that we're in spaces where we're appreciated and where there's a lot of love. And it sounds like you all, as students and the adults that surround you, are building that loving culture. So that's really awesome to hear.
And Vashaunta, I want to take that into these capstones that they do because I love sports. And so I talk to coaches and I say, hey, how do you get your players to be confident? And do you believe your players will perform better when they're confident? They always say yes. But think about that with teachers. As educators, how do we help our students be confident? And you're actually having students do capstones and public speaking and getting out with the community. Can you tell us more about that?
We work with NISN. It's a NACA inspired school network, and they've helped us through this in developing a capstone. And basically, the idea is exactly what I said. Let's give some kids some agency. That's our ideas here. But the capstone is going to be the tool that helps us guide that. And in that capstone, we've asked kids to identify in this community some things they'd like to help with. So, for example, one of the students chose trash disposal because it's an issue. We've got dogs tearing into trash and all this stuff. So the thing on the capstone is, you don't, if you're in a play, not everybody has to be the actor out in front of everybody. You don't have to be able to be up in front of everybody. You might be the set designer and you might get really good at designing sets because you know what? I don't feel good in front of people speaking. And that's what we've tried to encourage in our kids. I've got kids that will always really struggle with getting up in front of people, but there are other ways. There's webcasts. There's so many different ways to show what you know. And that's what we're trying to encourage them to do.
I love that. Show what you know, right? It's the
Yeah.
pathways, and
Yeah.
that we don't all have the same skills and gifts and comforts, but we all have them. We just got
Yeah.
to show them differently, and that you can take the time to know the students and to help them discover those and put them in those spots where they can have success and build confidence. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And of course, Naomi, we'd love to hear your perspective on that. When you think about your capstones or your projects, what are some of the things that you really love about that type of work?
I like making yakiso and I like making shawls,
How do you think that will help your community someday?
teaching others how to make shawls
Okay.
in the future.
Yeah, it's like passing down some knowledge that you have to others in the community. That could be very powerful. Well, let's talk about another aspect of your school. Dan, we talked about the role of culture and language in learning. Like that's a really powerful part of the
Sure.
fabric of the school, right?
Sure.
And when we talked, you described a bit how language is passed down through storytelling and community traditions and events, rather than maybe the written way that maybe
Oh,
most of us
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
think,
And
right?
that's been a big challenge, when you don't have a written language. Let me share a story with you that I think kind of encapsulates the beauty of what we're trying to do in my mind, because it touched me. So here I am from the Western world, right? And we're going to teach kids how to read and all those things. And so we went and got PD for all our staff on read alouds. And there's a certain way to do it. And so the next week, that's where you take a book and all the kids read together and then you ask questions as you're reading the book. The next week, I was observing classrooms to see how what we had learned is being used. And I happened to be in one of my Ute teachers' classrooms, and she was reading Corduroy the Bear. And Corduroy the Bear is, if anybody's familiar with it, he's a little bear that's in a department store, and his overalls are missing a button. And so during the night, he goes looking for this button. And that's what the whole story's about. Anyway, she's reading this, and she's to that point in the story talking about he's looking for his button. And a bunch of the kids replied, "Oh yeah, this bear's looking for his button because it's off of his overalls." But there were about 6 or 7 other students that said, "No, he's going to be looking for stuff the rest of his life." And as a white man, I'm sitting there going, what in the world are they talking about? And I'm so thankful that we had a Ute teacher in that class at that time, because she said, oh, yeah, here's what you guys are thinking of. Well, in the Ute culture, if the umbilical cord is referred to as the button, hence belly button, right? If you don't take care of that umbilical cord in the correct way, which is putting it in a pouch and tying it to a cradle board, is one of the ways. If you don't take care of that in the correct way, then that child will be looking for things the rest of their life. So some of these kids knew the Ute culture, had heard that story passed down. And so when she read A Bear is Looking for His Button, they felt like he was going to be looking for things the rest of his life because he'd lost his umbilical cord. Um, if we hadn't had a Ute teacher in there at the time, what a amazing opportunity for learning culture and academics and listening to stories and all of that we'd have missed. So that's just the type of thing that, I don't know, it just blows my mind when we can have that going on in a classroom.
We talk about curriculum and learning being rigorous and relevant and meaningful, and it sounds like you're finding ways to do that by using the community, using the culture, using the elders, and that just seems like strengthening to the entire community.
It really is, Jim, when you, we are a community academy, and we've got parents that had terrible experiences in school. Many of them don't even want to walk through a public school's doorway. Down here, it is to the point now. We started with 20 something students. We are now getting, we're up to 82 students, and it's because people are trusting us. They feel like we're family, that we've outlasted things. The Ute Reservation, unfortunately, is very used to programs coming and going. We're going to be here, and we want to be that community gathering place. And it does improve kids' education because they just feel safe.
And it's theirs, right? I mean,
It's
that
theirs.
community pride, that sense of pride. I have the privilege in Michigan working with the Bay Mills tribe, and it's Ojibwe. But
Okay.
in their case, they both are an authorizer of charter public schools. So in your world, they would be your Colorado Charter Schools Institute, but they also have a school and a community college, and the pride that the community has in the quest for learning and growth and community center activities is just a beautiful, glorious thing to see.
Wow. Wow. I hope we have the opportunity to just keep on building this so that we become that strong. That's
And you're
amazing.
not alone. In our work at the National Charter School Institute, we're privileged to see people in different states, and there's a number of you that are operating really successfully. And we've had a dream one day to get together all of those that are serving Native and Indigenous, and have a summit and talk about what each other is doing, what we're learning, and how we grow as a community.
Yeah. Yeah, and that synergy, being part of NACA, CSI has been amazing, by the way. I couldn't, we've had two other charter schools in the region go toward CSI now because they are so helpful in getting us started and helping us stay on track. But NISN has been amazing because they are that Indigenous group, and they've been through so much that we are sure lucky to be part of that group as well.
Dan, you're hearing this now, and I can share the goods that we're actually giving an inaugural Bold by Choice award at our first Bold by Choice Summit in Grand Rapids, Michigan, to the Colorado Charter School Institute. Dr. Terry Croy Lewis and her team are just
Yes.
phenomenal at creating pathways and helping schools that others would just say too difficult, too hard, doesn't fit the mold, and they've been finding possibilities. And your school is an example of that as well. And what I love about Terry is she was a charter school mom, right? Helped
Yeah.
start a school. And here she is leading this institute, and they're just doing such good work. And that you guys have that relationships and support, again, is a very powerful component to changing the arc of education.
Oh, I agree 100%. And, being a veteran, they are a breath of fresh air. And talk about helpful. My God, just unreal.
And isn't it nice when you can pick up the phone and talk to the leader?
Yes. Yes.
You can just resolve so many
Absolutely.
things so quickly.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, Dan, my last question before we get ready to wrap is, we talked about there are so many ways to think about the success of a school. When you think about Kwiyagat Community Academy, what are the things that let you know that what you're doing is working for your students and for your families?
That's something that I wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning, making almost worried about making sure that we've got this. I need to know we're doing the right stuff. One of the things I'd say, Vashaunta, that uh, we have been lucky to being approved as an alternative education campus. And that means that we've met the right markers to give us some other opportunities besides just academics and the CMAS to show that we are worthy, right? And so one of the things, other ways we measure kids, and I'm so thrilled with that we're able to do that because of the trauma this population has had. And I'm not just talking about trauma to the children right now, but generational trauma. Uh, I really strongly believe that social emotional learning should be a measure that we would be allowed to be measured by. And so we currently are using something called the DESA, and we are testing kids, and it measures supposedly how strong, like I was talking, their armor, got to build the armor. How are they able to handle the trauma they've been through? And this kind of measure, I think, is pertinent to saying we're a successful school. I really believe in Maslow's personally as a leader, Maslow's hierarchy. You got to be fed, loved, safe, all of those things before you can really start to learn. There's another, James Comer writes about relationships, and true learning takes place when there's relationships. There's where I feel like sometimes these are unmeasurable to this point. Now, will they pay off in the future? Absolutely. I think as we build those things, we're going to see the academic scores that seem to be the ultimate measure. But when it comes to relationships and feeling safe, and then our SEL measures going up, showing our students are getting stronger and stronger about handling trauma in their emotions, that to me is another way to measure the success of our school. Our kids are going to come out of here and have that armor. They're going to have those abilities. They're going to have those tools in how to deal with so much that ends up knocking a lot of our kids down, whether that be drug addiction, suicide, alcoholism, all of those things. Ideally, we're going to have a bunch of kids that are able to be leaders and strong, and that isn't something that typically it might be measured, but that's not how we're judged.
It's not lost on me that you talk about the challenges facing your community. And some of them are even like basic assumptions that some of us here in the country may hold about what kids should be doing and how they should be navigating in school time. And I love that you've kind of unpacked how that looks different for your community and the rationale behind it, right? Like looking at the historical significance, looking at the cultural significance and the language. And you've built something that really works in this community. And it reminds us that they're totally capable of meeting the expectations that we have. And so I just want to pause for this moment, appreciate you and Naomi for joining us and for sharing a little slice of your story with us today.
Well, Goyak,
The Kwiyagat.
that means thank you in Ute. She's my teacher. See that?
Just to make sure we're saying it right.
Okay. I can do better.
Well, friends, thank you again for joining us and for the incredible work that you're doing with students and families. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us and for continuing to be bold by choice. This season is sponsored by the Founders Library, and where you can explore the ideas that help to shape the charter movement from its inception. Until next time, we hope that you stay bold, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.